Sadia, can you tell us a bit about the background of the business your father started and then how you began working at the company as an employee before you started to lead it?
My father, we as a family, we used to live in the United Kingdom. And my father used to work with BCCI. And BCCI had a core banking software by the name of Mini Falcon that was implemented in around 55 countries around the world. And Abu and his team from London used to provide support to all of the global operations. Unfortunately, the bank closed down in 1991. This is well before you guys were probably born even, so you may not remember this. But the bank closed down, and all of these 55 units became individual operating branches. And the liquidators, they had to spin off these individual units and sell them. So somehow, each of the branch managers who had worked with my father over the years, they would consistently refer the liquidators to him. Anytime there was a software problem, they'd be like, call Mr. Khan, he'll help you. Call Mr. Khan. So he inadvertently entered into this business. Now, at the time, the Mini Falcon system, which was BCCI's core banking, it had been developed using NCR tower hardware. Again, this predates you. You won't be able to relate. But these machines used to take up a whole room. They weren't individual PCs. And NCR had a cost that had been capped when it was implemented for BCCI at about $7,000 per year for the global banking branches. Now, when BCCI collapsed, NCR, also uncertain, obviously, for its own forecast with this bank, they increased the cost of that maintenance to about $100,000 a year. And none of these branches could afford it, but they still needed to continue to operate.
Right.
So my father saw an opportunity. And in that, he started working on a futuristic PC-based core banking system. I'm talking about around 1992. At that time, none of the bank CEOs could even imagine that there would be a PC on a table that could run their banking operations. But he managed to work on the system, develop it completely with his own hands. And you have to understand this is visionary, because the time that I'm talking about, this wasn't something that was commonplace. He went to Yemen and he spoke to one of his customers, and they knew him and they trusted him, but I don't think they believed him at the time. But they said, okay, why don't you go and develop the system and implement it for us? So he actually went on a ship to South Africa, bought back physical PCs, and he implemented the solution there.
Wow.
That was the birth of AutoSoft's predecessor company, Automation Software Services.
Okay.
Later on, he saw the acronym was not WISE, so he changed the company name when we formed it later in 2000. Magar, at that time, he came back to Pakistan. We as a family had moved to Pakistan. He was moving around. And that's when he met Said Iqbal Chaudhary, who was at the time the CEO of Prime Commercial Bank Limited. They had been using a core banking system that had been given to them from a UK-based company. I think that later was acquired by Mises, and lots of problems.
Okay.
Love se profit. Agar interest ko profit mein change karna hai, State Bank gives them a regulation, says change the word, £20,000 ka quote. Now, what are you going to do? You're stuck. At that point in time, Abu started to consult with Prime Bank. Then later on, Said Chaudhary really requested that he come on board. He basically started to develop a team. There was an explicit understanding with Said Saab that once he joins the bank, he will continue to operate automation software services and continue to provide support to customers. And if he gets new sales, he'll continue to do that. And they had this explicit understanding that subsequently AutoSoft would be formed at a certain point in time. So come 2000, Said Chaudhary and Khan Saab were having this conversation, and Abu said he wanted to spin off, and it was time. in this last 3-4 years, he's developed a range of products, not just the core banking, and he has a brilliant team. Mashallah, at the time of our sale, I think 50% of our workforce had worked with us for a decade or more.
Yeah.
And some of the people who moved at the time of inception, they're still with us today. So they were given a choice. Khan Saab said, would you like to move to AutoSoft or would you like to continue with the bank? And the team quickly said, we want to move. And they moved to AutoSoft, and that's when it began in June 2000. I, at the time, was in college in the US. And in 2002, once I graduated, Abu said, why don't you come to Pakistan and try it out for a year? I was a little skeptical, a little unsure, new business. But I said, okay, chalo, ek saal, let me come give it a shot. 1 year turned to 2, turned to 5, turned to 15, eventually 20 years.
Right.
So when I came, it was at the very startup stage. I joined personally in a very entry-level role. I started in quality engineering, and I started to look at the process development. When you're developing a product-based company, it's equally important to enhance your processes alongside. So I went on to head and work on the ISO 9001 implementation. And I think that was our first achievement for me personally in the company. After that, I moved into different roles. I started looking at marketing, operations, sales and business development. And I think about a decade after I joined, I was promoted to Chief Operating Officer.
Oh.
Yeah, so I think 2017 is when I took over as CEO. And mashallah, AutoSoft had flourished over the years. I remember when South Sudan became a new country in 2011, we were able to penetrate the market very quickly. And within a year, we had 5 banks, and we were the largest operator in the country. Isi tarah, our core banking penetration within Pakistan had grown. We had Sindh Bank, First Women Bank, Finca, Apna Microfinance, Al Barka Bank, all of them using the core. Then our trade, treasury. Our treasury was operational in around, I think, 16 banks across the country and internationally.
Wow.
So, mashallah, the company had consistently been growing, and both in terms of revenue, in terms of the customers, and in terms of the employees.
Okay, so Sadia, can you tell us why you chose to sell the business and what made you feel that Constellation and Contour were the right home for it?
So, as I mentioned, we had consistent growth over the last decade. We'd been profitable since inception. And aksar conversation hoti thi where we would think in order to accelerate global presence and growth, it might be worth exploring strategic investment. But nothing really materialized of that. Never really pursued it. It was just a thought in the back of our minds. What happened with CSI was unexpected. I remember it was the peak of COVID. I think it was August 2020 when Bilal called me for the first time. I was not aware of what CSI was, what it did. I was bored that day, and I decided to take the call. But during that call, I was actually quite intrigued. I thought it was very interesting. I think at that time, there was 100 countries, 800 companies around the world that they had acquired. And they'd managed to give a lot of growth and economies of scale to those companies. So the first conversation was positive enough for me to consider a second. But of course, there was lots of apprehensions in my mind. I think predominantly there were 2. I think number 1, I was concerned about the legacy and the company history and the spirit. We had a very strong spirit and a strong history. And aksar you hear oftentimes about global companies coming, buying smaller companies and then cannibalizing the product, right? So that was something I felt very strongly about. And it was a legitimate concern. Then the other thing, which was equally important to me personally, was our team. As I've told you, I think more than 50% of our team at the time of acquisition had worked with us for over a decade. Many of them had spent their careers at the company. So it was very important for me that any decision that I took was very good for them. And that was another concern. And I laid them out to Bilal and the CSI team. And I remember we had a conversation just around this. And two things that really stuck with me were, number one, the philosophy behind the company and the acquisition strategy, that it's to buy to hold.
Right.
There's no desire to sell or spin it off. So that was very important. And then the other thing was that he said that the existing employees basically take the reins of the company, and using all of the relationships that they've cultivated with the customers over the past 2 decades, they basically lead the future. And I think those two together were what cinched the deal for me. So from my perspective, the pre-acquisition is a lot of work. Learned a lot more legalese. I think going back in time, I learned a lot about the legalese around a sale and acquisition of a company. I've spent a lot of my life doing contract negotiations. Magar, this was different.
Yeah.
I think even from when we started the conversation, I remember we started talking August 2020, December 2020. We were on the way to move forward, and we were about to start due diligence. And Bilal was very confident. He was saying, "Okay, 2 se 3 mahine, we'll be done. Won't be an issue." And I was like, "Great." But that didn't happen. There was a lot of work that went into populating the data room, making sure everything was up to par. And then I think around Jan 2022, when we exchanged the SPA, when that came around, obviously now CSI has been doing this for a long time. My first acquisition, but they've done it a lot, so they knew exactly what to do when.
But first of Contours as well.
First of Contours, first of CSI in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of firsts. So at that stage, I think when the SPA came, obviously a lot of the screws had been twisted to the right in favor of the buyer. Then there was a lot of back and forth in negotiation, and eventually we came to a win-win agreement. But by the time the deal closed, it was April 2022. So almost 2 years later.
Yeah.
I think the sale has allowed me to free up a lot more time. My husband would beg to differ. He always asks me, "How is it that you are busier now than you were when you were running a 180 people company?" But I think now I'm serving on a few financial sector company boards, serving on Faisal Bank's board and Kush Foundation, and then a couple of not-for-profit. So from my perspective, the sale has allowed me to free up a lot of my time, and it allowed me to use it to create greater impact. It was a family type of company. We had a very family-like environment as well. So that fear was there. But in the long run, I think over the last year and a half now, some who had left themselves have rejoined the company. The company's revenues are growing. So I think there's much more optimism. The employees are now feeling benefits that they were initially anxious about. So mashallah, it's great.
That's good, because we've seen, tremendous employee satisfaction rates this past year. So
that's excellent.
So have you observed any cultural and moral engagement changes in the staff as the post-acquisition has progressed? How has the company culture changed since the acquisition?
Okay. So since immediately after the acquisition, I think there's a definite upswing in the morale of the employees. And mashallah, I am very excited of what lies ahead. I think the employees are very much back on track, and they're excited about what lies ahead. And mashallah, with the continuous growth in revenue, I think fantastic times lie ahead.
Perfect. So, Sadia, from where you stand now, how do you think this acquisition has brought value to both sides? Were there any outcomes that surprised you?
So I think let's first speak about CSI. I think that when they entered into Pakistan, this was their first acquisition. And mashallah say, it was a company that had consistent growth, a stable customer base. So eventually, once the deal closed, I think it's been excellent. The first company in the acquisition, crown in their jewels, is Pakistan's largest core banking solution. So I think that was fantastic. From our perspective, I think one of the best things that was also a little surprising and something I was anxious about is the earnouts. When we had been negotiating the contract, they were unknown. You didn't know if they would be attained. You didn't know if they would even be honored, honestly speaking. There is a great deal of uncertainty at that stage. Right. And also, you're not sure what's going to happen and what isn't. But I'm very happy to say that the earnouts have come. They have actually exceeded our expectations. And they've been honored not just in letter, but in spirit too. So that's something that I was very happy about. And I think all of the shareholders were.
Are there any lessons or insights you think would be helpful for others going through something similar?
So for anyone who's actually planning to sell their business, I think number one, I would recommend having a data room populated from day one. If you have embarked on that journey and you know that you want to sell the business, start putting in your financials, updating your monthly records in a folder on a shared location so you know all of your employee records, all of your customer contracts, everything, invoices. Just start organizing that data very effectively.
Would you recommend that to other players in the market?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the end of the day, hindsight is always 2020.
Yeah.
And when you're at the stage at the time of the initial contract finalization, there's a lot of apprehension and you don't know which way it's going to go. But 2 years down the road, I'm still cautiously optimistic. But I think that moving forward, I'm very excited to watch from the sidelines.
That's amazing. Thank you, Sadia. This was an amazing interview.
Thank you.
And thank you for giving us your time and giving us your time for Conto for this interview.
Not at all. Thank you very much.